Xiao Xingchen's smile froze. The name Shuiyang struck him with a great excess of force. The remaining color in his face, which had little to begin with, drained away completely when he heard the name, leaving his lips nearly powder white. Shuiyang, he whispered, voice full of uncertainty. Suddenly, he startled awake. Arching, how do you know that name? Shuiyang's the guy who's been hanging around us. That horrible thing. The guy who's been hanging around us? Xiao Xingchen asked dumbly. The guy who's been hanging around us. He shook his head, appearing dizzy. How do you know? I heard him kill someone, Arching replied. He killed someone? Who did he kill? A woman. She sounded very young. I think she was carrying a sword, and Shuiyang was secretly carrying one too, because I heard them fighting loudly. Clang, clang. The woman kept calling him Shuiyang, and she said he was a murderer and an arsonist. Massacred an entire temple, and everyone thinks he needs to be punished. Oh my God, that man is a demonic, bloodthirsty maniac. And he's been hiding by our side this whole time. Who knows what he's been planning? Arching hadn't slept, and instead had spent the entire night brewing lies in her stomach. First of all, she couldn't let Dao Zhang know that he had mistaken living humans for walking corpses and killed them. It was even more imperative to prevent him from learning that he had killed Song Lan with his own hands. Thus, even though she could never make amends to Song Dao Zhang, she couldn't divulge the cause of the man's death. The best she could do was to tell Xiao Xingchen Shuiyang's identity, so that he could make a quick escape and run far, far away immediately. But this news was much too difficult for Xiao Xingchen to stomach. On top of that, the suddenness of the revelation made it seem absurd. He found it inconceivable, beyond belief. But his voice isn't right. Also, anxious, Arching stabbed the ground with her bamboo pole repeatedly. His voice isn't right because he's been intentionally faking it. He was afraid you'd recognize him. Suddenly, realization flashed and she leapt up. Ack! Oh right! Oh right! Oh right! He has 9 fingers. Dao Zhang, did you know that? Doesn't Shuiyang have 9 fingers? You must have seen his hand before. In an instant, Xiao Xingchen's legs buckled beneath him. Arching rushed over to support him and helped him take a seat by the table. A very long while passed before Xiao Xingchen spoke again. But Arching, how did you know he only has 9 fingers? Did you touch his hand? But if he really is Shuiyang, why would he let you touch his left hand and discover his disfigurement? Dao Zhang, Arching exclaimed, clenching her teeth in agitation. I'll tell you the truth. I'm not blind. I can see. I didn't touch it. I saw it. Each thunderous revelation was louder than the next, hammering Xiao Xingchen's head until his words nearly left him. What did you say? You can see? Though Arching was afraid, she could no longer hide the truth from him. She apologized repeatedly. I'm sorry, Dao Zhang. I didn't mean to deceive you. I was just afraid that if you knew I wasn't blind, you wouldn't let me stay with you anymore. I was scared you'd chase me away. But please don't get mad at me right now. Let's run away together first. As soon as he's done buying groceries, he'll come back. Her mouth was slammed, abruptly shut. The bandages wrapped around Xiao Xingchen's eyes had originally been as white as snow, but now 2 faint red spots started to seep through from the other side. The spots grew darker and darker until finally they penetrated the cloth and blood began trickling down from his eyes. Dao Zhang, you're bleeding, Arching shrieked. As though he had only just become aware of it, he let out a soft, oh, and lifted his hand to feel his face, covering his fingers in fresh blood. Arching's own hand trembled as she helped him wipe it off, but the more she wiped, the more blood there was. Xiao Xingchen raised his hand. I am fine. I am fine. Early on, the wounds in his eyes bled whenever he thought too much or felt too strongly. but a long time had passed since the bleeding had last occurred. Wangxian had even believed that they had already healed. Who would have guessed that they would bleed again that day? But if he really is Xueyang, how could everything be like this? Xiao Xingchen muttered. Why didn't he kill me at the outset? He stayed by my side for so many years. How could it be Xueyang? In the beginning, he did want to kill you. I saw his expression. It was ferocious and terrifying, but he was injured and couldn't move, so he needed someone to take care of him. I didn't know who he was. If I had known he was a murderous, demonic maniac, I would have stabbed him to death with my bamboo pole while he was lying in the underbrush. Daojian, let's run away. But mentally, Wangxian sighed. That's impossible. If she hadn't told Xiao Xingchen, he would have continued living with Xueyang like this indefinitely. But now that she's told him, he wouldn't ever just run away. He's going to be absolutely insistent on personally questioning Xueyang. This is a problem with no solution. Predictably, once Xiao Xingchen had forced himself to calm down, he said, Qing, you should leave. His throat was slightly hoarse. Me? Leave? Qing said, a bit frightened. Daojian, we should leave together. Xiao Xingchen shook his head. I cannot. I must find out the exact nature of his plans. He must have a goal, and moreover, he probably stayed with us all these years, pretending to be someone else, to achieve it. If I leave him alone here, I'm afraid he'll launch a heinous attack on all the people of Yi City. This is how Xueyang has always been. This time, Qing's weeping was not an act. She threw her bamboo pole aside and clung to Xiao Xingchen's legs. Me leave? Daojian, how can I leave on my own? I want to be with you. If you don't leave, then I won't go either. If the worst happens, he'll kill us together. If I'm on my own out there, I'll die poor and alone, sooner or later. If you don't want that to happen to me, then we have to escape together. Unfortunately, now that the secret of her sight had been exposed, pretending to be pitiful no longer had the same effect. Qing, you can see, and you're also bright. I believe that you can make a good life for yourself. You do not truly know the extent of Xueyang's terror. You cannot stay, and under no circumstances can you go near him again. Qing's internal screaming was so loud that even Wangxian could hear it. I know how scary he is. But she couldn't open her mouth and spill the whole truth. Suddenly, the sound of light, brisk steps came from the distance. Xueyang had returned. Startled, Xiao Xingchen lifted his head, and he adopted the sharp, alert state he assumed during night hunts. He dragged Qing close and whispered, In a moment, when he enters, I will deal with him. You need to take advantage of the opportunity and flee at once. Listen to me. Terrified, Qing nodded tearfully without a thought. Xueyang kicked the door a couple of times and called, What are you guys up to? I'm already back, but you still haven't left yet. If you're still there, undo the latch and let me in. I'm exhausted. Alone, his tone and manner of speaking make him sound just like a boy next door, a vivacious shidi. Few could have imagined that standing outside the entrance at this moment was a deranged fiend in whose soul all traces of humanity had been extinguished. A walking, talking demon wearing the skin of an attractive young man. The door wasn't locked, but it had been bolted shut from the inside. If they didn't open it now, Xueyang was certain to grow suspicious. By that point, even if they let him in, he would continue to be wary. Qing rubbed her face, then shouted at him. Exhausted my ass! How much do you have to walk to buy groceries? You're tired after a few steps? What's it to you if I take a little longer to change? How many outfits do you even have? Xueyang said scornfully. You can change back and forth all you want. You'll still look the same. Open the door, open the door. Though Qing's calves were fighting to keep her upright, her mouth was still loud and forceful. Pfft, I'm not going to open it for you. If you're so great, kick it down yourself. Xueyang let out a laugh. You're the one saying this. Daojang, when you have to fix the door, don't blame me. Once he finished, he kicked the door, which flew open. He lifted his foot, stepped over the tall threshold, and came inside, holding a basket brimming with fruits and vegetables in one hand. In the other, he held a glistening, bright red apple. Just as he took a bite out of it, he looked down, only to see Shuanghua's blade pierce his stomach. The basket tumbled downward, and the cabbages, radishes, apples, and buns rolled onto the ground. Qing, run! Xiao Xingchen commanded in a whisper. Qing broke into a run and fled out of the coffin home's main entrance. For a brief period, she sprinted frantically along the road, only to abruptly turn around and change direction. She tiptoed back to the coffin home and crawled toward the hiding spot she was most familiar with, which was also the place where she eavesdropped from most often. This time, she even poked a bit of her head out in order to spy inside the house. Was it fun? Xiao Xingchen asked coldly. Still holding onto his apple, Xueyang took another bite and chewed leisurely for a while before swallowing the sweet apple flesh. Finally, he spoke again. Yes, it was fun. How could it not be fun? He was speaking in his original voice again. What exactly were you trying to accomplish by staying by my side these years? Xiao Xingchen asked. Who knows? Maybe I was just bored. Xiao Xingchen pulled Shuanghua back out and prepared to strike again. Xueyang opened his mouth once more. Xiao Xingchen, Daojang, that story I never finished telling. Don't you want to hear the second half? No. Though Xiao Xingchen had verbally refused, he tilted his head slightly, and his sword paused. But I have to tell you, Xueyang said. Once I'm finished, if you still think I'm in the wrong, then do what you want. Casually, he touched the wound on his stomach, pressing it to prevent even more blood loss. When the child saw the man who had tricked him into sending the letter, he felt both very wronged, but also very happy. Wailing, he hurtled toward the man, telling him, I sent the letter, but the desserts were gone, and someone beat me. Can you give me another plate? But it seemed that the burly man had caught the man who offered the desserts and had given him a thrashing. His face was injured. Plus, seeing this filthy child clinging to his leg agitated him tremendously, so he kicked the child away. He then boarded the ox cart and told the driver to leave immediately. The child crawled up from the ground and chased after the cart, refusing to stop. He wanted the sweet, sweet desserts so badly. Finally, after much effort, he caught up and ran in front of the cart, waving at them to stop. Irritated by the sound of the child's crying, the man seized the whip that the driver was holding and cracked it on the child's head, making him fall. Xueyang's next words were spoken one at a time. Then, the wheels of the cart ran over the child's hand, crushing his fingers, one by one. Not caring that Xiao Xingchen was blind, he lifted his left hand to the man's face. 7 years old, all of the bones in his left hand broken, and one of his fingers ground into pulp on the spot. That man just so happened to be Chang Ping's father. Xiao Xingchen Daojang, when you captured me and hauled me to Jinlin Terrace, your words were so righteous. You condemned me and asked me why I killed an entire clan because of a little grudge. Since they weren't your fingers, you and everyone else don't understand the pain. Why didn't you ask him why he treated me like some plaything, without any rhyme or reason? The Xueyang of today was bestowed upon you by the Changxian of the past. The Yueyang Chang clan reaped no more than it had sown. If you want to avenge yourself on Changxian for breaking your finger, you could have just cut off one of his and be done with it, Xiao Xingchen said in disbelief. If you absolutely cannot get over your grudge, then break 2 or 10, or you could have even cut off his arm. Even then, it would have been better. Why did you have to kill his entire family? Don't tell me you think a single one of your fingers is worth more than 50 lives. Surprisingly, Xueyang pondered this carefully for a while, as though he found Sha Xingchen's question very strange. He replied, "Of course, the finger was mine, while those lives were other people's. No matter how many I killed, it wouldn't have repaid the debt. It was only 50 or so people. How could it make up for my single finger?" The confident self-righteousness that Xueyang spoke with drained the color from Sha Xingchen's complexion. "Then what about the others?" he shouted. "Why did you have to massacre all of Bai Shui Temple? Why did you have to blind Songlan Zichen Daojiang?" "Then why did you have to stop me?" Xueyang asked in reply. "Why did you have to get in my way? Why did you have to offer a lifeline to the dregs of the Chang clan when they were trying so desperately to get their head above water? Were you helping Chang Xian or Chang Ping?" Remember how moved to tears Chang Ping was in the beginning, and later how he begged you to stop. "Sha Xingchen Daojiang, you were wrong from the start. You shouldn't have interfered with other people's fights, with other people's grudges and debts. Can an outsider judge who's right and who's wrong, who deserves kindness and who deserves blame? Or maybe you shouldn't have come down from that mountain in the first place. How smart your master Baoshan Sanren was. Why didn't you listen to her and obediently stay on the mountain and cultivate? If you can't figure out how things work in the wider world, you shouldn't have entered it." Sha Xingchen could no longer bear it. "Xueyang, you truly are exceedingly disgusting." When Xueyang heard those words, the ominous glint which had been absent from his eyes for so long resurfaced. He let out a cold and bitter laugh. "Sha Xingchen, this is exactly why I despise you. The thing I hate most, more than anything else, is people like you. People who flaunt their righteousness in everyone's faces. People who believe themselves to be noble and pure. People like you who think that just because you idiots did a few good deeds, the world will magically become a good, wonderful place. Moronic, naive fools. You're disgusted with me? Great. Do you think I'm afraid of people thinking I'm disgusting? But are you qualified to be disgusted with me?" Taken aback, Sha Xingchen asked, "What do you mean?" Both Ah Cheng and Wei Wuxian's hearts nearly leapt out of their chests. "We haven't killed any walking corpses at night recently, right?" Xueyang spoke in an intimate tone. "But the first couple of years, didn't we slaughter a whole mountain of them every few days?" Sha Xingchen's lips trembled. He appeared uneasy. "What do you mean? Why bring this up now?" "I don't mean anything," Xueyang replied. "Only, it's too bad you went blind. You dug your own 2 eyes out and couldn't see the walking corpses you killed. You couldn't see how afraid they were, how much agony they suffered when your sword passed through their hearts. Some even got on their knees and kowtowed. They begged you to spare their families, elderly and young, with tears in their eyes. If I hadn't cut out their tongues, they'd have definitely wailed at you, crying, 'Daojiang, have mercy.'" Sha Xingchen's entire body began to shake. A very long time passed before he was finally able to open his mouth again. "You're lying to me. You're trying to trick me," he said, with great difficulty. "Yes, I tricked you. I've tricked you this entire time. Who would have guessed? You believed every lie I told you. But now that I'm telling the truth, you won't trust me anymore?" Sha Xingchen staggered toward him, swinging his sword. "Shut up! Shut up!" he shouted. Covering his abdomen, Xueyang snapped the fingers of his left hand and backed away. His expression was no longer human. His eyes flashed with green light, and the 2 small canines that poked out when he smiled now made him look like an evil spirit in the flesh. "Good," he shouted. "I'll shut up. If you don't believe me, then speak to the thing behind you. Let him tell you whether or not I tricked you." Xiao Xingchen felt the wind of an incoming sword and lifted Shuanghua to block it without a thought. When the two swords met, he froze. Not only did he freeze, in the blink of an eye, he transformed into a haggard, weathered stone statue. Very, very carefully, Xiao Xingchen asked, "Zichen, is that you?" There was no reply. Song Lan's corpse was standing behind him, seemingly gazing at Xiao Xingchen. But the pupils of his eyes were gone, and in his hand was a sword that now clashed with Shuanghua. Having certainly trained together regularly in the past, the two could identify each other from no more than the force of their crossed blades. But Xiao Xingchen seemed afraid of drawing the evident conclusion. Slowly he turned. His hand trembled as he reached out and felt the blade of Song Lan's sword. Song Lan didn't move, so his fingers continued upward, until finally they brushed over the two characters engraved on the hilt. Fu Shui. Xiao Xingchen's face grew even whiter. Struck dumb, he continued groping mindlessly at Fu Shui's blade, failing to notice even when the edge sliced open his palm. His entire body shook so violently that his voice seemed to tumble out and scatter across the floor. "Zichen, Song Daojiang, Song Daojiang, is that you?" Song Lan continued to stare at him silently, not a word passing between his lips. The bandages wrapped around Xiao Xingchen's head were now so thoroughly soaked by the blood streaming endlessly out of his eye sockets that they had turned into two terrifying, bloody caverns. He wanted to reach out and touch the person holding the sword, but he was utterly unable to summon the courage to do so. His hand stretched out, only to shrink back. Agony tore at Ah Cheng's chest, the pain so bad that both she and Wangxian struggled to breathe. They gasped for air, and tears burst in torrents from their eyes. Xiao Xingchen stood in place, even his hands and limbs at a loss for what to do next. "What's going on? Say something." He crumbled completely. "Someone say something." Just as Xiao Xingchen wished, Shuiyang spoke. "Do you still need me to tell you the identity of the walking corpse you killed yesterday?" There was a loud clang. Shuanghua clattered to the floor. Shuiyang exploded in howls of laughter. Xiao Xingchen knelt before Song Lan, whose stance was rigid and wooden. Clutching his head, he broke into a heart-rending, lung-shredding wail. Tears of laughter began blooming in Shuiyang's eyes. "What's wrong? Two close friends meeting again. It's so touching, you're even crying. Do you two want to hug each other?" He jeered viciously. Ah Cheng covered her mouth tightly, refusing to allow a shred of the sound of her sobbing to escape. Inside the coffin home, Shuiyang paced as terrifying abuse flew from his mouth, full of both fury and rapture. "Saving the world. It's so funny, I'm going to die of laughter. You can't even save yourself." Wangxian felt several sharp pains stab at his brain, but this pain did not originate from Ah Cheng's soul. Utterly defeated, Xiao Xingchen knelt beside Song Lan's feet. He shrunk until he was very small, as though he had become a withered lump that wanted nothing more than to disappear off the face of the earth. His once spotlessly white Taoist robes were now stained with blood and dust. "You impotent, miserable failure. You have only yourself to blame. You were asking for it," Shuiyang shouted at him. That very moment, as Wangxian looked upon Xiao Xingchen's body, he saw himself. A miserable failure, covered in blood, impotent, fingers pointed at him, furious denouncements shouted in his face. Powerless to reverse the motion of the sky, powerless to do anything but weep. Xiao Xingchen's once white bandages were now dyed thoroughly red. His entire face was smeared with blood. As he did not have eyes, he could not shed tears, only blood. Deceived for several years, he had mistaken his mortal enemy for a good friend and had his goodwill trampled underfoot. He had believed himself to be eradicating evil spirits. Instead, his hands were soaked in the blood of innocents. His own best friend had died by his hand. He could only let out a miserable sob. "Spare me." "Didn't you just try to stab me to death with your sword a few moments ago? Why are you suddenly begging for mercy?" Xueyang replied. He was clearly aware that so long as Song Lan's corpse protected him, Xiao Xingchen could not possibly raise his sword again. He had won once more, overwhelmingly and totally. Suddenly, Xiao Xingchen grabbed Shuanghua from where it had fallen. Turning the weapon around, he rested its sharp edge against his own neck. A pure silver light streaked across Xueyang's black, sunless eyes. Xiao Xingchen's grip slackened. Crimson blood streamed down along Shuanghua's blade. As the distinct clang of the sword striking the ground resounded, Xueyang's laughter and movements came to an abrupt halt.